They were just two newlyweds, a simple honeymoon in the mountains of North Carolina, one rented cabin, one hiking trail, and then nothing. No bodies, just an empty car and silence that lasted 14 years, until a teenage boy climbing a tree found an old phone, wedged 12 feet above the ground, with her name still scratched on the back. What was on that phone would reopen the case, unravel a hidden truth, and lead his sister straight into the dark heart of a secret no one was supposed to survive. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because some stories were never meant to be buried. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the smell of pine and wet bark still hung thick in the air. It was late September in the Blue Ridge Mountains, just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The forest had that kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, but expectant, like something was watching, something that had waited a long, long time. High above the forest floor, where the fog hadn't yet lifted and the leaves dripped cold onto the earth below, two teenage boys were taking turns climbing a tall white oak. They weren't supposed to be out this far, but Tommy Nance was chasing a dare, and his best friend Brent couldn't resist filming it. "Come on," Brent whispered. "Say something dumb for the camera so I can put it on TikTok." Tommy, 16, with a scraped knee and too much to prove, grinned. "If I fall, make sure they play Nickelback at my funeral." He climbed higher. At about 12 feet up, Tommy paused. Something had caught his eye. There, wedged awkwardly between two branches, half covered by moss and bird droppings, was a black object that shimmered just slightly in the weak light. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Did you find a squirrel skull?" Brent called from below. Tommy reached out. His fingers closed around something plastic, cold, and far too modern-looking to belong up there. It was a cell phone. Old, caked with grime. The kind that still had a thick plastic case and faded keypad buttons. He stared at it, then flipped it over. There, scratched faintly on the back, was a name. Emily Carter. The phone hit the news that night. It shouldn't have mattered, just another old object lost to time. But the name carved into the case had haunted the town of Asheville for 14 years. Because in 2009, Emily Carter and her husband Caleb Whitmore disappeared without a trace. They had just gotten married in Nashville, honeymooned for 3 days in Asheville, checked into a rustic cabin on the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains, and then gone. No last phone call, no sightings, no witnesses, no... Only their rental car was found abandoned at the edge of a hiking trail, doors locked with their luggage still in the trunk. A forest search that involved 70 people over 2 weeks yielded nothing, until now. And now everyone was asking the same thing. Why was Emily Carter's phone hidden 12 feet up in a tree, almost a mile from the last place they were seen? The police reopened the case the next morning, but one woman had already booked a flight back to Asheville. Grace Whitmore hadn't been there in years, not since the original search, not since she buried her parents, who died believing their only son had wandered into the woods and never came back. But Grace never believed that. She always thought someone had led Caleb and Emily off trail, always thought the story didn't make sense. And now, as her plane descended into Asheville Regional Airport, her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her ears, because this wasn't just a phone. This was a message, and maybe, just maybe, after all these years, there was still something left to find. The forest hadn't changed. Grace stood at the edge of the trail later that afternoon, wearing the same worn boots she'd walked in 14 years earlier. The trees were taller now, but the chill in the wind, the whisper of leaves, the way the light never quite touched the ground the same way twice, that was all the same. She remembered the first day of the search, the volunteers, the barking dogs, the crackle of radios, the helicopters that came and went too fast. She remembered walking and calling Caleb's name until her voice broke, and how, by the fourth day, people had already started assuming the worst. But not her, never her. A soft rustle in the trees behind her made Grace turn sharply. Nothing, just wind. But something in her gut twisted, like someone had been here, recently. Later that evening, Grace met with Detective Ray Morley, now retired. He hadn't aged well. His limp was worse, his hands shakier, but his eyes were just as sharp. He placed the bagged phone gently on the table between them. "Battery's long dead," he said, but the SIM card was intact. Grace stared at the object like... "We recovered a few images," he continued. "Mostly photos from the wedding. Nashville? The road trip here. One video, too." Her breath caught. He tapped a folder. "You sure you want to see this?" She nodded, slowly. He reached over, inserted the SD card into a laptop, and turned the screen toward her. It was grainy, the kind of footage that feels more ghost than memory. A shaky camera, low light, the glow of a campfire. Emily's face filled the frame, smudged with dirt, hair a mess. "Fear," she was whispering. "We're not alone out here," she said. Then a pause. "I don't know where Caleb is. If you find this..." Crack. A sound off camera. Emily flinched, glanced over her shoulder. Then the screen went black. That was it. No timestamp, no location data, no follow-up video, just 12 seconds of fear frozen in digital memory, sealed in a tree for over a decade. Grace didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. The video looped in her mind over and over every time she closed her eyes. "Not alone. Don't know where Caleb is. If you find this..." It wasn't just a final message. It was a warning. And the part that terrified Grace most was that Emily hadn't sounded like she was running from a stranger. She sounded like she knew exactly who was out there with them. The next morning, Grace retraced her brother's last known path. She followed the overgrown trail beyond the sign that read, "Hikers stay on marked path," past the cold stream and the ridge where search dogs once lost the scent. And then she saw it. A strip of yellow fabric caught on a low branch, faded and fragile with age. It fluttered slightly in the breeze. Grace stepped closer. It was the same kind of fabric from Caleb's hiking jacket. She reached out to grab it and froze, because just beyond the tree line there were boot prints in the mud, fresh ones. Grace Whitmore had never truly left Asheville. She might have boarded a plane 14 years ago and built a new life in New York City, but something about this town, the air, the trees, the sound of wind rattling through pine, had never let go of her. It had rooted itself in her skin like dirt beneath fingernails that never quite washed away. Even now, as she sipped a bitter coffee in a quiet corner booth of the Huckleberry Cafe, she could feel it. That old weight on her chest, like the past had walked in and sat across from her without asking. The cafe hadn't changed. Same chipped mugs, same flickering fluorescent light over the register. Same waitress with the pearl earrings who used to call Caleb sweetheart when he brought Emily in for pie after their hiking dates. Grace stared at her hands. They were shaking, not from fear but from remembrance. Grace was 24 when her brother vanished. She had just started her job as a junior copy editor for the New York Herald. Life was chaotic and exciting. She was single, lived in a studio apartment over a bakery in Brooklyn, and never made her bed. Caleb was 28. A civil engineer who loved maps, climbing, and documentaries about the kind of person who always stopped to talk to strangers and left voice messages just to say he missed. He met Emily Carter at a local volunteer cleanup event. Grace remembered how his voice changed after that. "I think she's it," he had told Grace on the phone once. "I think she's the one." She believed him. The last time she saw Caleb was at the wedding. He looked nervous, but happy. Emily wore a and carried sunflowers. The whole thing was small, personal, held in the backyard of their parents' home in Tennessee. Caleb danced with them. Grace remembered snapping a Polaroid of it and pinning it to the fridge. That photo was still there, faded now, but pinned with the same magnet her mother had used. 4 days after the wedding, they disappeared. For years, Grace didn't speak about it. She buried herself in work, changed apartments twice, cut her hair short. She stopped going to weddings, stopped listening to voicemail messages. Her grief lived in the little things, like how she couldn't walk past a park without imagining Caleb and Emily hiking through it, or how she once broke down in a department store just because someone was wearing the same perfume as Emily. Not for what happened, but for not being there. She'd been so focused on building her future that she didn't see the cracks form, and by the time she looked back, they were already gone. Her parents never recovered. Her mother stopped gardening. Her father barely spoke. The house, once filled with light and the smell of coffee and vinyl records, became a tomb of silence. They both died within 6 years of the disappearance, one from cancer, the other from a broken heart. Grace buried them next to an empty plot meant for Caleb, but she never filled it, because part of her never believed he was truly dead. The years that followed were lonely. Grace became a freelancer. She worked on investigative stories, mostly small cases, corruption, workplace harassment, unsolved burglaries. But she always had a folder labeled C+E on her desktop. Every tip, every Reddit post, every blurry photo, every rumor about hikers gone missing in the Smokies. She kept it all. It wasn't obsession. It was love and refusal to let go. The moment she saw Emily's phone in the evidence bag, something shifted in her. Not just the reopening of the case, but the hope that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been wrong. Maybe someone had known more all along. Grace folded the old map Caleb had drawn for her years ago. He used to make custom ones as gifts, highlighted trails, marked spots with stars, left handwritten notes like, "Best view at sunset" or "Watch for raccoons here." This one had a note, too. It said, "One day we'll hike this together. Bring marshmallows." Her fingers ran across the ink, smudged slightly from age and moisture. The trail on the map wasn't the same one the police searched back in 2009. It ran deeper into the forest, past where the park rangers stopped looking. She had never told anyone she still had it, not even Detective Morley. That night, in the small guest room of a rented cabin on the outskirts of Asheville, Grace stared at the ceiling and thought about the video again, Emily's voice. "We're not alone out here." It haunted her, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The fear in Emily's eyes didn't look like panic. It looked like recognition, like she had seen something, or someone she already knew. The next morning, Grace visited the ranger station. She introduced herself to a young man named Wes Dillard, who had been 10 years old when Caleb and Emily vanished. "I remember the posters," he said quietly. "I used to see them on my school's bulletin board. That was heavy." "You still patrol the old trails?" "Only the ones marked safe." "What about unmarked?" He paused. "Technically, we're not supposed to." Grace showed him the map, the one Caleb drew. Wes stared at it for a long moment. Then he whispered, "There's a place past Rockledge Ridge. Locals call it Dead Man's Hollow." Grace frowned. "That sounds made up." He looked at her, serious now. "It's not." By late afternoon, she was standing at the trailhead alone. Wes had offered to go with her. She declined. This was something she needed to do alone. Her boots pressed into mud and moss. Her fingers gripped the map like a lifeline. Every sound made her flinch. The creak of trees, a snap of twigs, the groan of distant wind. And then she saw it, a clearing, silent, undisturbed, and in the middle, a rusted fire ring, blackened rocks, ash still caught in crevices, like someone had been here, maybe not recently, but certainly not 14 years ago. Because scattered around the ring were things no forest could preserve. A melted flashlight casing, an old thermos with faded stickers and half buried in the dirt, a charred hiking boot. Her knees gave out. It was Caleb's. She remembered it from their last trip together. The red lace, the worn heel, the marker stain on the tongue from when he'd accidentally stepped on a pen. She held it to her chest and wept. That night Grace lit a single candle in the cabin. The light flickered softly against the wooden walls. On the table beside her sat the old hiking boot, the folded map, and her recorder. She hit record. "If anyone hears this," she whispered, "my name is Grace Whitmore. My brother disappeared in 2009 with his wife. Today, I found the place they were lost. There's something in these woods. Not a monster, not some supernatural thing, but something human. And I think they knew who it was." Her voice cracked. "I don't know what I'm walking into tomorrow, but I'm not leaving until I find the truth." Outside, the wind picked up. Branches tapped against the window. And just before Grace blew out the candle, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. Once, twice. The knock never came again. Grace stood frozen for nearly a full minute, the candle still flickering by the table, casting long shadows on the cabin walls. She stepped slowly to the front door, her heart pounding in her ears. No sound, no movement, just the creak of old wood beneath her feet and the distant howl of wind through pine. She reached for the handle. Unlocked. She cracked the door open. Nothing, just darkness. The gravel path outside stretched quiet and empty toward the forest line. No footsteps, no tire tracks, no figure waiting in the shadows. Only the faint scent of wood smoke and something else, something that smelled like metal and earth. She looked down. Lying at the base of the door was a folded slip of paper. Grace stared at it, then, very carefully, picked it up. There was no writing, just a single red X drawn in marker across the center. Her breath caught. She knew that handwriting. It was Caleb's. Grace didn't sleep that night. The note, the smell, the knock. It clawed at her mind like an itch she couldn't reach. She turned the X over in her hands again and again, but there was nothing else. No other mark, no code, no message. At 3:12 a.m., she gave up trying to rest. She opened her laptop and began scrolling through the police report from 2009. Her fingertips were shaking slightly. She'd read it 1,000 times. But tonight something felt different, like the answers had always been there. She'd just been looking at the wrong things. Then she saw it. Line 47, search day 3. Volunteer John Barrow reported unusual howling sounds east of Ridge 9, not confirmed by others. Dismissed as Grace froze. Barrow. Shame. He wasn't a ranger, just a local handyman who had joined the volunteer crew because he'd felt called to help. She quickly searched his name. No current listings. No known address, but there was a comment on an old local news forum from 2011. Barrow still lives near the hollow. Man's gone quiet since the search ended. Never came to town again. Grace's pulse quickened. She copied the coordinates from a tagged trail photo in the thread. And the next morning, just after dawn, she set out to find him. It took 3 hours of hiking and one wrong turn. But eventually, Grace found herself at the edge of an old, slanted cabin. The place looked abandoned, boarded windows, roof sagging, chimney leaning to one side like it had given up halfway through standing. She approached slowly, listening. The woods were too quiet. Then the front door creaked. Someone had opened it. A man stepped into view, older, gray beard, eyes low, clothes stained from wood and oil. He stared at her like he hadn't seen another human in years. "You lost?" he asked. Grace took a breath. "I think you knew my brother." Inside, the cabin smelled like kerosene and pine. Barrow didn't speak much at first, but after Grace showed him Caleb's photo, something shifted behind his eyes. "I remember him," he said finally. "And the girl. Pretty smile, scared eyes. You saw them?" "Briefly. Morning they vanished. They weren't on the trail, came from behind the ridge." Grace sat forward. "You talked to them?" "No," he whispered, "but someone else did." Barrow told her about a man. middle-aged, average height. Wore a tan park ranger's uniform, but wasn't from the station. Said he had met him once near Dead Man's Hollow, claiming to be with the forestry department. Didn't have a badge, Barrow said. Didn't carry a radio, but he had keys to the locked service gate. "What's his name?" Grace asked. Barrow hesitated. "Don't know, but locals call him Hale." The name rang no bells, but when Grace mentioned it to Wes Dillard, back at the ranger station, his expression darkened. "Hale?" he repeated. "That's a ghost story." "What do you mean?" "There's an old ranger tale about a guy who worked the Smokies back in the 80s. Real name might have been Halston or something. Story goes, he went rogue, started living out in the woods, took people off trail, said he was protecting them from what was coming." Grace blinked. "What does that even mean?" Wes looked at her. "It means he stopped bringing them back." 2 nights later, Grace received a voicemail, no caller ID. The message was only 6 seconds long, just static at first, then a man's voice, distorted, deep, like recorded through an old radio. "You shouldn't be here, Grace." Click. Things began unraveling fast. The following morning, someone had broken into her rental cabin. Nothing was stolen, but the map was gone. Only the hiking boot remained, now placed on her pillow, as if someone had been watching her the whole time. Back at the police department, Detective Morley reviewed the voicemail. "It's routed through a voice mask," he said, "prepaid. Can't trace it." Grace didn't care. She had seen the X, heard the knock, felt the eyes on her in the woods. Something was happening. And she wasn't the only one it wanted silenced. She visited the old Search Command site next, a rusted trailer that once held radio equipment and case files. Now it was abandoned, covered in moss and vines. But inside, still intact, was a chalkboard with names and notes from the original search. In the far corner, under a list of search parties, she found something strange, a Polaroid, unlabeled, taken from behind a group of volunteers, and in the background, slightly out of focus, was a man in a tan ranger's outfit, but with no name badge. She scanned the photo, enhanced the image, and sent it to a retired forensic tech she'd once worked with in a harassment case. 3 hours later, she got a reply. "Grace, I ran facial comparison. That man isn't on any official park records. But he does appear in a photo from 1985. Different name, Philip Hale." The file attached showed a younger version of the same man, listed as a fire lookout in the Smokies. Last recorded activity, 1989. No resignation, no transfer, no death certificate, just gone. Back in her cabin, Grace reviewed the facts. Caleb's boot, left deliberately at a fire ring. Emily's phone, hidden in a tree no animal could have reached. A man named Hale, impersonating a ranger with access to locked areas. The red X, Caleb's handwriting. And Emily's voice on that video. The conclusion was inescapable. Someone had lured them away, and someone still didn't want the truth uncovered. That night, Grace returned to the ridge alone. She didn't tell the police, didn't tell Wes. She had memorized the landmarks on Caleb's old map, and her gut told her she was close to something important. But as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, she heard it. A sound, not wind, not animal. It was human, breathing right behind her. She spun. No one. But on the ground was a cassette tape, wrapped in plastic, labeled in shaky handwriting. "Play me." Grace brought the tape back to the cabin, found an old tape recorder in town, clicked it into place, hit play. The hiss of static gave way to a man's voice. Not Caleb, not Hale. Another man, calm, cold. "She knew we'd come back. She knew too much. That's why he ran. That's why he'll always run." Then silence. Then a woman's scream. Muffled, far but unmistakable. Then Caleb's voice, whispering one word. "Grace." The tape kept playing long after the voices stopped. just a low, persistent hiss, like wind across a microphone. Grace let it run as she sat on the edge of the bed, the recorder resting beside her, heart hammering against her ribs. He had said her name. Caleb, not in fear, not in pain, but almost like a reminder, like a whisper into memory. It was his voice. She would have bet her life on it. Grace didn't go to the police. They'd already failed once. Instead, she made a list. The video of Emily, the tape with Caleb's voice, the red X, the boot, the man in the photo. And now, a new question. Why were these clues left where she could find them? It was as if someone wanted her to know just enough to stay close, but never arrive. She drove into Asheville the next morning and parked outside an old bookstore near Lexington Avenue. The owner, Vivian Oakley, had worked at the local ranger's office in the 1980s before quitting abruptly. She was in her 60s now, thin, with eyes like sharp needles. "You asking about Philip Hale?" she said, after Grace showed her the photo. Vivian didn't blink. He was a recluse even when he wore the badge. "Why did he disappear?" She laughed once, bitterly. "He didn't disappear. He was removed." Grace leaned forward. "By who?" Vivian stared back. "The Forest Service." Quietly. No press. No funeral, no answers. They wanted him gone. Why? Vivian looked down, then back up. Because Hale started believing the forest didn't belong to people anymore. Vivian pulled an old notebook from a locked drawer. "He kept journals," she whispered. "Rambling stuff, maps, names, codes. One entry said, 'She shouldn't have come back. She opened the wrong path.'" Who was she? Emily. Grace felt her pulse jump. Vivian handed her a single torn page, yellowed, faded pencil. It read, "North Ridge, under the stone with 3 scars. She left it there, and if she tries to return, I'll bury it where no one will find her again." Underneath, a symbol. 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal slash. Grace had seen it once before. On the thermos next to the campfire ring. That night, Grace followed the map markings to North Ridge. The air was colder there, heavier, trees, denser. She climbed until the trail vanished completely. A massive boulder, moss-covered, scarred by 3 long vertical cracks. Beneath it, loose soil, recently disturbed. Her hands trembled as she dug, and then her fingers touched something hard. She pulled it out. A metal lunchbox, rusted shut. She forced it open. Inside, a silver locket, a strip of 35mm film, a torn journal page with blood on the edge, and a wedding band. The inscription read, "Forever, even lost." Caleb. The film strip showed 6 frames. Emily, sitting near a stream, face bruised, knees scraped, holding something close to her chest. The next frame, her screaming, looking behind her. Then, a shadow, human, looming. Then, Emily running, hair flying, a blur. Then, a second figure in the distance. And then, Grace brought the film to Detective Morley. He had aged more in the last week than in the last 5 years. This is enough to reopen the investigation completely," he whispered. "I can push for state involvement." But Grace wasn't interested in bureaucracy. "I need to know what happened to them," she said. "Not 10 months from now. She went back to the cabin, sat with the locket in her hand, inside it a tiny folded note. Unfolded, it read, "We were wrong. It wasn't an accident. He waited for us. He knew we'd trust the badge. I saw him with the camera. He made us climb. If you find this, tell my parents I tried." It was signed, Emily Carter Whitmore. Grace's breath hitched. Emily had survived, at least for a while, long enough to understand what was happening, long enough to leave a breadcrumb trail. But who was the camera for? Who was watching them? She found the answer 2 days later. In a forgotten basement beneath the ranger station, Wes had given her access after hours. The lower level had been sealed after a flood in 2015. Moldy boxes, old maps, dust-thick air, and in the back corner, an old VHS camcorder. She almost missed it. Inside, a tape labeled Wilder 2009 she rented on a borrowed player that night. The footage opened on a dense forest, low angle, like someone hiding. Emily and Caleb walked into frame, laughing, holding hands. Then a cut. Next shot, night, a tent, muffled voices, a scream cut again. Emily crying. Looking directly into the lens. Why are you doing this? Cut. Caleb bleeding, tied at the ankles, whispering something Grace couldn't hear. Then the same shadow figure from the film strip, cut. End. Grace vomited into the sink. She had never imagined it like this. This wasn't a wild animal attack. This wasn't a wrong turn. This was planned, filmed, preserved. Someone had made them suffer and recorded it. The timestamp on the last clip? October 3rd, 2009, 3 days after they were reported missing, which meant they had been alive, while the search was already underway, and whoever had done this was close enough to watch both unfold. She replayed the tape again. This time, something caught her eye. In the background of one clip, barely visible, was a torn banner, red and white. Smoky River Logging Co. She Googled it. Shut down in 1992, but the storage yards still stood, right at the edge of Dead Man's Hollow. She packed her flashlight, a camera, a voice recorder, and went alone. The logging camp was derelict, rusted equipment, graffiti, a single remaining structure, the bunkhouse, roof partially caved in. Inside, under the floorboards, she found it. A second camera, battery long, dead, but memory card intact, and on the wall, carved deep into the wood. He never left. Grace rushed back to town. This time, Morley had already pulled a name, Philip Hale. Retired under duress, history of psychiatric evaluations, obsession with cleansing the forest. The report included a chilling line. Subject believes select individuals must be broken by nature to be reborn. Last known address? A cabin 1.2 miles east of the original disappearance site. Never searched, because it wasn't on any official map, and because it had never belonged to the Forest Service. Grace stood outside the cabin as night fell. The air was still, thick with coming rain. The door hung slightly open. Inside, somewhere, she could hear it. The faint, unmistakable whir of a VHS player turning back on. The cabin was darker than night itself. No lights, no sound. Just the smell of rot and the soft mechanical whir of a tape rewinding. Grace stepped forward slowly, flashlight gripped tight in one hand, pepper spray in the other. The door creaked open. Inside it was colder, not just from the temperature, but from the feeling. The sense that the walls had absorbed too many screams and secrets over the years, and now sat silent, waiting. Dust floated like ash in the beam of her flashlight. Wood groaned under her boots. And then, in the corner, she saw it. A small television, a VHS deck. And on top of it, an unlabeled black tape, already playing. The image on the screen was unstable, grainy, washed in green from low-light night vision. But Grace recognized the scene instantly. It was the logging yard. Emily stood in frame, shoulders slumped, dried blood on her face. Then, a voice behind the camera, male, too calm. "Say your name." Emily hesitated. "Say it." "My name is Emily Carter Whitmore." "And why are you here?" She looked up. "Because you brought us." The camera tilted slightly. "Did he come willingly?" Emily trembled. "No. He tried to run. Where is he now?" Her silence was the answer. Then the frame cut. Black. Grace's body locked in place. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stood still, letting the shock sink deeper into her bones like cold water into concrete. Then she noticed something. Beside the TV, stacked neatly, were 5 more tapes, each labeled with a number, E01 to E05. She reached for the first. But before she could insert it, she heard a sound. Footsteps. Outside. Heavy. Deliberate. Not fast. Not afraid. Grace killed the light and crouched, heart pounding. She peeked through a crack in the window. A man stood by the trees, back turned, tan ranger's coat, same height, same build. It was him, Philip Hale, still alive, still watching, still playing this game, but something wasn't right. He wasn't alone. Standing next to him, silent still, was a second figure, smaller, slender. Hair pulled back, face in shadow. It was a woman. Grace backed away from the window. What the hell was going on? She thought Hale had been acting alone. But now there was someone else. Was it Emily? No, couldn't be. Emily was dead. She had to be, didn't she? She needed to get out. Now. But as she turned toward the door, her boot hit something, a box. Open. Inside, rows of old cell phones, dozens, different models, different years. She reached in and pulled one out. A sticker on the back read, Eich. Monroe, 2013. Then another, S-Catcher, 2016, and another, A. Velez, 2020. It wasn't just Emily and Caleb, there had been others. Grace felt her vision tunnel. The forest hadn't just swallowed one couple, it had taken many, and Philip Hale hadn't stopped. He'd evolved, gotten smarter, better at hiding. She grabbed the tapes, all of them, shoved them into her bag, and ran. Through the trees, past the clearing, across the old stream. Branches tore at her arms. Roots tried to trip her. But she kept going, because now she knew the truth. This wasn't a mystery. This was a pattern. Back at the cabin, Grace locked the doors and windows, drew every curtain, and set up her laptop. She had a VHS to digital converter from her previous investigations. One by one, she transferred the tapes. It took hours, and each one made her heart break more than the last. Tape 01, Emily talking to the camera, her eye bruised, saying goodbye. Tape 02, Caleb digging, forced to build something. Shackled at the ankle. Tape 03, a fire. Screams, night, static. Tape 04, Caleb tied up, pleading into the lens. If anyone finds this, I'm sorry, I tried. Tape 05, a confrontation. Philip Hale on camera for the first time, face calm, almost gentle. He knelt beside Emily. You were right about people, he said. They never come back for each other. He looked directly into the lens. Except her, your sister. She never gave up. Then he smiled. Cold, hollow. Maybe she'll be the one worth saving. Grace dropped the laptop. The screen cracked. The room spun. She ran to the bathroom and threw up again. That night she called Morley. I have evidence, she said, and a name, multiple names. He said he'd call the state police. But when she asked if he'd come over, there was hesitation in his voice. I'm not sure I should get involved anymore, he said. Grace blinked. What are you talking about? I've got family, Grace, grandkids. This is bigger than any of us. But not for long, because the next morning, tucked under the cabin door, was another note. Same handwriting, same paper. Just 4 words. He isn't the worst. Grace froze. Who wrote this? Was someone helping her? Was someone else trapped in this game? She reviewed the footage again, frame by frame, and in one freeze, tape 4, she saw it. Emily, standing behind Hale, eyes hollow, face blank. But on her wrist, a bracelet. Grace remembered it. Her mother had given it to Emily at the wedding. But there, in the footage, it was on the wrong wrist. Suddenly it hit her. The footage hadn't just shown suffering, it had shown manipulation, control, gaslighting. Emily hadn't died. She had become part of it, maybe by force, maybe by choice. But she was alive, and now helping him, or worse, helping someone else. Grace pulled every piece of evidence together, the phones, the locket, the tapes, the film, the symbols, the man named Hale, and Emily still alive. But one thing didn't fit. The red X. Why leave a clue? Why guide Grace at all? Then she remembered something Emily had said on the tape. He made us climb. Climb what? A mountain? A tower? No, a tree, like where the phone was found. And that's when Grace realized the phone had not been dropped. It had been placed. By Caleb. The scratch on the back wasn't just wear and tear, it was intentional. A signal he had escaped. At least once. And if he had escaped, maybe he was still alive. Grace returned to the clearing one last time, this time with coordinates from the tapes. She followed them off-trail, deep into a part of the forest not even maps recorded, and there, hidden behind a curtain of vines, she found a trapdoor, camouflaged, bolted, but slightly ajar. She pulled it open and descended. The air was damp, the steps narrow, the smell, mold, rust, and something faintly sweet, like old decay. And at the bottom, barely visible in the darkness, a metal cell door, and behind it, a man, beard long, face thin, eyes adjusting to the light. He stepped forward and whispered, "Grace?" Before Grace could answer, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of boots on the wooden steps behind her. Then the trapdoor slammed shut, locked. The air in the bunker was thick and sour. No windows, no airflow, only the sound of Grace's own heartbeat. She stared at the man behind the bars. His eyes, sunken, haunted, were unmistakable. It was Caleb, alive. Barely. She moved toward the cell, trembling. "Is it you?" he whispered, voice like rusted metal scraping concrete. She reached through the bars, tears already streaming. "It's me, Caleb. It's Grace." He collapsed to his knees, but before she could say another word, the trap door above slammed, and the lock clicked into place. They were trapped. No signal, no exit, just darkness and memories. Grace lit her last emergency light. It barely cut through the shadows. Caleb sat beside her on the floor, shivering. "I thought you were dead, but I was, for a while." He took a breath. "Emily, she didn't die." "I know." She tried to run, but he broke her. Grace blinked. "Hale?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "No. Hale was just the beginning." Silence. Then, "There's another." Caleb's voice trembled as he spoke. "She came later, said she was from a group, said we were chosen to suffer. That pain made us pure." That fear opened the mind. Grace's skin crawled. "Was she involved?" He nodded. "She watched, filmed, taught Emily how to survive, how to forget me. She called herself the archivist." It didn't sound real, but the pain in Caleb's eyes was. He told her about the years underground, how he'd tried to escape, how he'd nearly succeeded once, climbed a tree, dropped Emily's phone, left an X, but they found him, broke his leg, chained him here. Emily came to see him but she never spoke. Just watched, then walked away. Grace couldn't stop shaking. She leaned into him, held his head, and whispered, "You're safe now. I promise." But she didn't believe it, not yet. Hours passed, no sound from above. Then the hiss of a speaker mounted on the ceiling, and a voice, female, calm. "Welcome, Grace." Grace stood. "I've waited a long time to meet you." It was Emily. Her voice was different, colder, controlled. "I watched you climb, fight, refuse to forget. I admire it." "Where are you?" Grace shouted. Silence. Then, "I'm here." A door creaked open behind them, not the trap door, a side panel. They stepped through, hand in hand. The hallway led to a dimly lit room, half bunker, half observation chamber. Monitors lined the walls. Footage played. Years of torment. Dozens of victims. Every face catalogued. Every scream archived. And in the center, a single chair. Facing them, Emily. Alive. Different. Hair shorter, eyes blank. She smiled faintly. "Hi, Grace." Grace froze. "You're alive." Emily tilted her head. "I am." "What is this?" Emily looked around. Truth, control, memory. She stood slowly. I was weak once. Then I learned what pain really is. She's closer. And now, I'm not afraid anymore. Grace's voice cracked. You let him rot. I set him free. He's in a cage. Emily's expression didn't change. You came for answers, not comfort. Then she nodded toward a monitor. Watch. A video began. A younger Caleb, hands bloody. Eyes feral, screaming, raging, throwing himself against the walls of a room, screaming her name, but not Emily's, Grace's, over and over, as if calling her was the only thing keeping him alive. Tears streamed down her face. Emily said nothing. She just pressed a button. Another door opened. Stairs, light, freedom. Go, Emily said. Take him. You've earned it. Grace hesitated. You're not coming? Emily smiled softly. This is home now. Grace grabbed Caleb. They ran, up the stairs. Through the trees, night broke into dawn. Their lungs burned, but they didn't stop, not until they reached the ranger station. Wes was there. He saw them and dropped his coffee. Oh, my God. Authorities came. Statements were taken. The bunker was raided. But by the time they arrived, Emily was gone. Everything wiped. No tapes, no footage, just silence. And a note. Some things don't want to be remembered. The archivist. Caleb entered intensive care, broken bones, malnourished, but alive. Grace stayed with him every day, and every night she replayed their escape, wondering if Emily had ever truly been free or if she had become something else. Weeks later, Grace returned to the clearing, alone. She found the tree where the phone had been hidden, and on its bark, carved faintly, I'm still watching. She left a note at its base. 4 words. So am I now. Grace returned to New York, published the tapes, blew the story wide open. But late one night, a package arrived at her door. No return address. Inside a flash drive, one file titled Grace Sue Dent MP4. She clicked play, static. Then, her own face, sleeping, filmed from the edge of her bed. Grace didn't sleep for 3 days after the package arrived. She changed the locks, installed cameras, stopped answering the phone. She tried convincing herself it was fake, that someone had edited the footage, manipulated her face into the frame, but she knew better. Because in the background of the video, illuminated by moonlight through her apartment window, was her notebook, open to the last page, the words still visible on the screen. I'm still watching. For the next 2 months, Grace lived on high alert. Caleb stayed in a clinic outside Asheville, slowly recovering. Therapists said his trauma ran deeper than they'd seen in years. Grace called every day. He never stopped thanking her. But some days, when he sounded too quiet, too distant, she wondered if part of him was still down there in the dark. The state police raided the site again. This time they brought dogs, drones, and deep-ground radar. They found bones, not just once, at least 12, men, women, a child, no official names least. But Grace knew each one had once held a phone, or a dream, or a family, and then had been buried, forgotten, until now. But Emily was never found, not alive, not dead. Not even on a single camera after that final recording, as if she had vanished into the forest itself. Grace didn't know what to believe. Had she escaped? Was she still filming, still watching, still guiding someone else? Was she the archivist? Or just the first one broken? Grace stopped writing articles. The story had made headlines for weeks. News anchors gasped, podcasts speculated, Reddit exploded. But soon, the world moved on. Only Grace didn't. Because every time she closed her eyes, she heard Emily's voice. Some things don't want to be remembered. And then Caleb's, he's not the worst. Grace returned once more to the forest. One final time, she brought a shovel, a camera, a journal. She walked deep into the hollow where it all began. No trail, no map, just instinct. And silence. She found a second tree, older, twisted. On its bark, carved carefully, were 2 letters, G.W., her initials, not hers, Caleb's, from years before. She ran her fingers across them and wept. She buried the tapes at its roots, all of them, then sat back against the tree and wrote one final line in her journal. Maybe the story doesn't end when the tape stops. Maybe it just waits for someone else to press play. Grace never published again. She moved to a small coastal town in Maine, works in a bookstore, grows tomatoes, watches the waves. But every now and then, a package arrives. No return address, no sender, just a drive, a file. A name, and Grace, alone at her desk, hits play, not because she wants to, but because she can't not. Some stories never end, some voices never stop whispering, some wounds never heal, and some forests never forget. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the smell of pine and wet bark still hung thick in the air. Only this time, Grace wasn't chasing a ghost. She had become one. Sometimes the person watching is just waiting for someone to finally look back.